years old, so basically your age. So it's a pretty amazing literary feat that it was written at such a young age. But I also want to show you, as I will do on Thursday, the way that Percy Shelley collaborated in some of the revisions. He's not responsible for the text in any sort of way. It's her text 100%. And in fact, sometimes what he adds, you can almost tell. It's like when it starts getting kind of flowery or something, it's Percy kind of in rejecting his own sort of thing. But just keep that in mind, because I think it's very, very interesting that that this text has had such staying power and been so kind of ubiquitously thought of as a great text, even though, or maybe especially because it's written by someone so young. I was not a poet of any kind or even a scholar of any kind at 20 years old. I was, in fact, a smelly musician at the time. And I will tell you that the stuff I wrote was crap compared to this, obviously, right? In fact, that was quite a blow to my ego to realize that I had some learning to do as a songwriter. I don't know where. Does anybody have a spare piece of paper? You have a spare piece of paper? Yeah. Thank you. Can I have that also for a sign-up sheet? Not prepared. Thanks so much. All right. So last time we talked about three things. We talked about the sublime, right? And we talked about the way in which the creature meets Victor in the sublime. It's a kind of strange situation. We'll talk a bit more about the sublime on Wednesday, because there are two texts that I'll have you look at that are poems that relate to this text. One is in your syllabus. It is by Charlotte Smith, and the other is not in your syllabus, but it is in the book, and that's the poem Mutability by Percy Bysshe Shelley. And we'll basically just talk about the way the sublime, we might be able to figure the sublime within these texts and maybe get a better understanding of what it is. Again, just one of the things we talked about last time, just to give you a heads up, because it will be something that will probably be on the midterm, some kind of question. The sublime is really, the best way to understand it is something that is too powerful to be cognized. In other words, it sort of short circuits your ability to think about it. I use the example of the Grand Canyon as a kind of North American sublime, but the European sublime was very much the Swiss Alps, and the way in which when you go to these mountains, they're so large that they kind of escape your ability to think clearly about them, and they're also so wild. So that was the idea, that there was this kind of idea or thought or something that is too large to be cognized, and it is then felt in the body. And why do I pay so much attention to this? Because for me, concepts of the sublime give way to concepts of the unconscious. So basically, we have an 18th century idea sort of cooking and changing and whatever, becoming a 20th century idea. I say 20th century because it is in 1899, right at the end of the 19th century, that Freud publishes The Interpretation of Dreams, which is the first real fully theorized version of the unconscious. But what you're going to see, of course, is that this idea of bringing these two things together is already there in Romanticism, which is perhaps why I love it so much, why I teach it, and why I was so attracted to it. So in other words, I'm going to talk later about the idea of the creature being something like a repressed part of Victor's unconscious. And so you can see already that these ideas are getting blended together, and you're getting a kind of, in the 19th century, you're getting a kind of prehistory or a presaging, a kind of proto-unconscious that you then get later in the 20th century, fully formed. And now we have something even maybe different, which might have to do with virtuality and something like that. I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious that we're not still dealing with the same thing no matter what we call it, and no matter how it gets articulated, whether it gets articulated through a kind of, I think for us, we talk a lot, at least in the academy, we talk a lot about sort of like post-humanism or something like that. And I'm a little suspicious of that, even though I'm attracted to the way that that gets theorized. I think we're still in this kind of long history of trying to become human and trying to figure out how to live with one another and trying to figure out how to have a society that is for everyone at the same time as it allows for personal freedoms, right? So it's that tension that we have between, where I think we're still in that question. So I talked about the sublime, I talked about the education of a self, the way the creature sort of educates himself in different ways, and then finally the importance of books for the creature. And what I didn't talk about last time, which I thought I'll just bring up here really quickly, is that it strikes me as very interesting that the books not only they comfort the creature, but they also make him feel more alienated. So this is kind of like what knowledge does for us, right? Is it both, it comforts us, or it makes us feel a part of something, but it also makes us feel more alienated or more sad or more whatever. People who, like me, who sometimes go, you know what, I'm not reading the news for the next, 3 weeks or whatever it is, I'm not going to go there, will know what I mean, because you sort of feel good, but you also kind of like, you come back to it and you're like, oh, there it is. It's been with me all along, right? So it makes you feel both more connected and more alienated at the same time. That might be a better way to say it. It connects and it separates us from others. It's a bizarre kind of thing that literature can do. Thank you so much. All right, and then the last, that was basically what we talked about. So today I want to double back and talk a little bit about the relevance of the marginal figure or the immigrant, the importance to the novel of this. That's weird the way that doesn't read there. I want to talk about the ethics of the creature, and then I want to talk about Victor's repressed unconscious. So I said a little bit about this last time, and I'll kind of try to take it through this time to talk about Victor as a failed romantic poet. Why is this like this? There we go. That's a little better. Okay. So Henry Clerval, his best friend, is a kind of anti-Victor in many ways, right? So what we see is that Victor is able to find pleasure in nature, find pleasure in other people. He's able to study, wander, socialize, kind of engage with things. He has a certain kind of autonomy and freedom. And he's interested in history, like a kind of social space. So you might even say that, in a certain sense, that Henry is connected and Victor is separate, right? Victor is separate even from the people he loves the most. And And what you find in romantic poetry, both of the first and the second generation, is you get this idea that to be connected in nature, as Wordsworth might do it, it automatically connects you to other people. It's a social connection, even though it just seems to happen through a walk and you're kind of alone. I don't know quite how this works, and I'm not even sure that it does work, but I kind of believe that it does. So, remind me of your name again? Jennifer. Okay, Jennifer, let's say you play an instrument, right? And you're playing an instrument and you're rehearsing on that instrument. While you are rehearsing, it's possible to think about what you're doing as being a social action, even though you're all alone. Because it anticipates someone hearing it, and then being able to hear that music and be moved by that music. And supposedly it changes you. It opens you up. Just the fact of practicing music opens you up to a kind of connection with other people that you wouldn't have had if you weren't a musician. So Karl Marx, when he's writing, one of the great works of the 19th century, Das Kapital, which is really not any kind of like anti-capitalist text, it's just a theory of capitalism. When he's writing Das Kapital, he's spending all of his time in the British Museum, in the British Library, I suppose you would call it. And he's working like all day, as long as it was open, with all of the text that he could get to. And he said, when I am working with my books and when I'm working scientifically, that's what he called it, to be really focused on the theory. When I'm working scientifically, I am connected to the social. You see what I mean? Because he's going to publish this book. It's going to go all around the world. It's going to do all kinds of things, right? So when we are writing, that's the idea of romanticism. When we are writing poetry or in nature, experiencing pleasure in this way, it's preparing us to be opened up to more people. Henry Clerval can do that. Victor cannot. Do you see how that works? Victor is not able to do it. And there's a lot of different ways to understand Victor's not being able to do it. Maybe, as I'm going to sort of say later, that Mary Shelley is kind of writing Victor as a kind of late Enlightenment figure who's too married to scientific reasoning and not in touch enough with his romantic poet self. Or maybe also there's a way to understand Victor as traumatized in this way. And this trauma then causes him to be disconnected and alienated from everything else, and then repeating constantly the same thing, right? Every time somebody dies, he thinks, I should do something about it, I should change this, whatever. He doesn't. Each time, right, he is unable to move. He's sort of in his Hamlet space, his kind of Hamlet situation. Okay. Is that clear what I'm saying about this idea? It's a very, very, it's a very, very kind of romantic, flowery idea, but I kind of think it's a little bit true. I kind of think it's a little bit true that if you work in a way at something that, or do something that causes more pleasure and okayness in the world as opposed to destroying something, then you're sort of contributing to something that makes you more part of the social. Whatever. I don't think it takes the place of those social interactions. That's why I like to teach and look at you and be in the same present room as you. I mean, you can imagine what would happen if I tried to do an online class and I'd say, okay, let's meditate now. People would be like, click, pour some scotch, It wouldn't be the same thing, right? Or what is it? What's that number that signifies when you smoke weed in the afternoon? For what?
420.
420, it'd be 420, right? And automatically during that period of time. And it would be like, I love this professor. He always has this like little 3-minute break for me to get hot. But it's like you can imagine that, but really it feels like it's us being together. So I don't think it takes the place of that. And Clerval doesn't either. I think that's clear. He likes to go and meet other academics in other settings and talk with them and work with them. And he can connect with his family. He can connect with Victor. He can pull Victor out of himself. right? Elizabeth can do this too. So there are other like ideas of people that are able to do this, and then there are people that are not able to do this. In many ways, even though he's a bad romantic poet, this is the struggle inside of Percy Bysshe Shelley. It's like Mary looks at her husband, like maybe people can do when they look at their partners, and says, "Oh my God, he's like part Victor, part Henry," right? I mean, I love Shelley, but oh my God, complete narcissist. I mean, a complete narcissist. He knows it. He knows he's arrogant, and he knows he does these things, and he knows he's kind of hysterical and over the top and extra. You know, he can't help it. He's just who he is in a way. On the other hand, he's like wonderfully connected and all these other things. He's sort of both of them at the same time. All right. So, any questions about the bad romantic poet kind of idea? You get it? Okay. All right. All right. So, I want to turn to or focus your attention on, I think it's volume 2, chapter 9. Yes. So chapter 9, or IX in volume 2, is the end of the creature's long soliloquy. Something that I think Mary Shelley wrote pretty quickly. I've been reading some background materials on this. I think she wrote this whole section, kind of poured out of her, sort of. And I'll talk more about the way in which she was writing in the same notebooks that Percy was writing his poems in. So there's a lot of like, sometimes he would just come along and he'd be looking for some paper to write on, and he'd say, "Oh," and he'd start making corrections. Like you want to stab it with a pen, but you know, they weren't like that. They did that with each other. She copied out his poems and made fair copy versions of his poems, etc. I think the only difference is that she didn't take it upon herself to correct anything. She just copied them over. But like he would make these corrections. Sometimes they would be factual and they would be helpful, right? Like she got her Bacon's mixed up. She got Francis Bacon mixed up with a different Bacon. And he, no, that's Lord Bacon, blah, 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 blah. And so they kind of go back and forth like that. But this part, when she's writing this at the end, I'm interested in the way the creature then makes this plea for him to make another creature for him so that he could at least have a partner and they would go off. And part of the plea here is to sort of say, look, I know I've done these horrific things, but I'm basically not a horrible person, not a monster. So I wanted to kind of touch on this because I wanted to get at the ethics of the creature, which I said before are problematic ethics because they involve, for me they wouldn't work, you know, like you can't go around killing people. And this is, if you're a parent, you know what this is like. It's okay to have your feelings, but it's not okay to act on them, right? Okay. All right. So I'm going to keep reading for a little bit because I think it's really, really great writing, and just so that it kind of focuses in on this point. But you'll see when I end up why I'll ask you, or you'll see kind of why I end here. All right. So from the beginning, the being finished speaking. I just want you to notice how she's now referring to him as a being, not a monster, not a wretch. The being finished speaking and fixed his looks upon me in an expectation of reply. But I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange my ideas sufficiently to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued, "You must make a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being." In other words, I want to be like Mary and Percy Bysshe Shelley, completely entwined, falling into each other, kind of beautiful love story, right? This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right which you must not refuse. This latter part of his tale had kindled anew in me the anger that had died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers. And as he said this, I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. I do refuse it, I replied, and no torture shall ever extort a consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of men, but you shall never make me base in my own eyes. Shall I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone. I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent. You are in the wrong, replied the fiend. Notice how quickly he goes from the being to the fiend, right? Replied the fiend. And instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. I am not shunned and am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me. This is the kind of argument, there's a great rap song from way before you were born called The Hate That Hate Made by a great rapper from the Bay Area named Paris. Right? The idea there, he was a kind of fruit of Islam Muslim, and he's saying, you want to know why black people, why we want to have our own communities and why we hate you. You created this hate in us, right? Like he's speaking. I'm not saying that it's the same situation, but it's really, really powerful to me. Like, wait a minute, why should I care more for you than you want to tear me to pieces, and I'm your creation, right? So it's very powerful. Shall I respect? Should I respect man when he condemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit on him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I will revenge my injuries if I cannot inspire love. I will cause fear. And chiefly towards you, my arch enemy, because my Creator do I swear unextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, not finish until I desolate your heart, so that you curse the hour of your birth. A fiendish rage animated him as he said this. His face was wrinkled into contortions too horrible for human eyes to behold. But presently he calmed himself and proceeded. I intended to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that that you are the cause of its excess. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them 100 and 100-fold. But for that one creature's sake, I would make peace with the whole kind. But now I indulge in dreams of bliss that cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters cut off from the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me my request. I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice to his argument. His tale and the feelings he now expressed proved him to be a creature of fine sensations. And did I not, as his maker, owe him all the portion of happiness that was in my power to bestow? He saw my change of feeling and continued, if you consent, neither you nor any other human being shall ever see us again. I will go to the vast wilds of South America. That's right, there's nobody in South America. I'm sorry. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. The creatures, vegan people. I just want to point that out to you. There's pictures be. My companion will be of the same nature as myself and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves, the sun shall shine on us as on man, and ripen our food. The picture I present to you is peaceful and human, and you must feel that you could deny it only in the wantonness of power and cruelty. Pitiless as you have been towards me, I now see compassion in your eyes. Let me seize the favorable moment and persuade you to promise what I so ardently desire. Okay, wow, that's a lot of reading. So I just basically wanted to kind of cover that period because it's interesting to me on a number of levels. First of all, does anybody have any comments about this section specifically? Well, I mean, it's fair to point out that he's murdered so far. He's murdered a child and caused the death of somebody else, unfairly. So that's kind of being a vegan kind of cancels that out. There's a band that I used to know called the Vicious Hippies. Sort of like doesn't count if you're like really green, if you're a green murderer. But any other comments about this section before I say anything else, or about this kind of argument about the creature? Any questions about why does he? Is it a fair request that he's making, and how do you see this working? Mm-hmm.
It's like a weird duality of opinion of me regarding the monster's actions, because one, like, you can make the moral statement that killing an innocent person is wrong under any circumstance, but from a personal basis, I can say I don't blame him 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. It's a kind of it also I mean, if you understand too that in that moment of rage, right, it is in the moment of rage in which he kills what's his name, Andrew? Not Andrew. What's his name? The brother. William. When he kills William in this rage, there's kind of jealousy there that you see in children, right, of their siblings, right? So it's his brother, but it's kind of like low key in that kind of relationship with somebody that Victor loves and gives his love to. Yeah, I agree. Other comments about this? Yeah.
Well, we know he got abandoned when he was first created.
Yeah.
And it's no one if you were going back to the simple idea, he didn't really have a parent figure.
Yes.
No one really taught him what was right and wrong. We know he's very intelligent, but that must have something to do with the fact that he went and murdered this child.
Yes. Where I mean the thing that you can say is part of what he's arguing is that he not only learned goodness from us, but he learned hatred and unfairness from us. So his experience of being refused by the DeLacy's, who just look at him and judge him on the basis of how he looks, and he doesn't look right, even though he's there to try to be part of their family, to be adopted by them or to adopt them or something. He's rejected by them. He's rejected on every level. So he sees both sides of us, and he kind of then he not only copies the good, but he copies the bad. Right? Yeah. It's like their mom uses a cigarette and a bottle of beer, and she's like, "Don't take drugs." It's kind of like, yeah, okay. Right? That was not my point. She drank wine. Anybody else on this section? So I just want to point out that you can see a family resemblance in the creature. They are both really, really short-tempered. So the creature starts to get really pissed off, and he knows that he should be being, really calm in this section, in order to make, and he does this. And we're going to get to it in a second. When Victor tears apart the creature that he's making in front of the eyes of, the other creature, then it's like he just lost control. Because really, it's not like he's just like, oh, they're going to make babies. Well, I don't know how this works, but couldn't you just fix that if you're the creator? I mean, couldn't you? I mean, it seems possible that you could fix it in some way. I don't know. But anyway, I see a family resemblance there. I just wanted to point to it again. So of course, let's see what time we have. I want to, All right, so let me ask you a question that will take us to the next section, to volume 3, into volume 3. I would like to ask the question about the beginning of volume 3. So there are a number of reasons that make a lot of sense why he leaves Geneva and goes to England and then ultimately to Scotland to make the creature. One part of it is that he's trying to gather. So why England / Scotland? And I think part of what you get is you get this kind of, first of all, it's the, there are these, Humphrey Davies is it, maybe I misspelled that. I think it might be D-A-V-Y. I think that's it. Humphrey Davy, and then Erasmus Darwin. We talked earlier about these experimenters who were experimenting with this idea of regenerative form, being able to regenerate the human tissue, or to be able to sort of create life. And both of these guys were interested in this, experiments in this area. The other reason was it's the home of Romantic poetry. And also, I think Scotland in particular was the place where Mary Shelley grew up. She spent a lot of time in this very wild area. And so I think that there's a really interesting way in which to bring the novel to its conclusion, it needs to leave the continent and move into something that's closer to Shelley's own experience. Does that make sense? That she sort of sees the novel coming back to this kind of core place, or at least that's the way I understand it. It's not Scotland, it's Wales, isn't it? Isn't it Wales? I think so. I think it's Wales. I think so. All right. Okay. So I want to do want to do this section where he tears at the creature, and you might look at volume 3, chapter 2, for this argument that I made here about Henry and Victor, because he says here, I saw the image of my former self in Clerval. So, sorry, I'm just giving you more kind of evidence for how I'm reading this. Volume 3, chapter 2. My former self. In Clerval, I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. In other words, the good romantic poet. So he sees that. Okay. But what I'm interested in is when he destroys the creature that he's making. So that's in chapter 3. So we have the second moment. Volume 3, chapter 3. What you have, in a way, is a repetition. So one way to understand this, if you're reading this completely on Victor's side, then the way to understand this is that this repetition is a chance for him to do it differently than he did the first time. Right? So he can say to himself, good, I didn't make it this time, I tore it up. So I'm not going to inflict upon the world any more danger. Or he could say, shoot, I did the exact same thing. I reacted out of immediate feeling. I rejected something because I didn't understand it. It seemed different than me. I'm going to reject it. I'm going to tear it up. I'm not going to perpetuate this otherness into the world, this difference, right? This thing that doesn't seem. So in a way, the question is, does he repeat with, or does he break the cycle of repetition? To me, he repeats. In other words, he sets out to try to correct something, but instead he just doubles down on it. He doubles down on his own inability to accept otherness or something different than he is. So I'll just read the section. He's creating the creature. He's trying to make it, and he's getting very close. And he begins to think, well, wait a minute. What if this creature doesn't leave England? Or what if they do, and then somebody comes along? Are they going to kill them? What if this creature, what if they have babies, right? All of this stuff, right? So I'm on my page 115, which is the third paragraph of chapter 3, volume 3. I trembled and my heart failed within me when, on looking up, I saw, by the light of the moon, the demon at the casement. A ghastly grin wrinkled his lips, and he gazed on me, where I sat fulfilling the task which he had allotted to me. Yes, he had followed me in my travels. He had loitered in forests, hid himself in caves, and taken refuge in wide and desert hearths. And now he came to mark my progress and claim the fulfillment of my promise. As I looked on him, his countenance expressed the utmost extent of malice and treachery. I thought with a sensation of madness on my promise of creating another like him, and, trembling with passion, tore to pieces the thing on which I was engaged. The wretch saw me destroy the creature on whose future existence he depended for happiness, and with a howl of devilish despair and revenge withdrew. I left the room, blah, 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 blah. So let's just talk about this particular scene, scene. Why does he tear up the creature? What do you think? Yeah?
He's afraid of just giving the creature another name.
Yeah, but he already agreed to do it. So he just is like, what was I thinking? But what, I think you're right, that's what he's telling us. But what is it in the situation that causes him to do this? Yes?
I think it might be like the creature's pleasure that he sees while he's making this. You know, and I think that kind of disgusts him a bit to the point where he's like, I'm done with this.
Right. I don't think that if the creature has a wrinkled grin, it's really not his fault. Those of us who have wrinkles, no. I'm just saying it's not. The creature made him. The creature made him. Victor made him. But yeah, I think it is that. It is that he sees. But it's interesting that you said the pleasure that he sees, because I think there's a kind of like sense in which he doesn't want. Yeah, that pleasure. But there's something very otherly about him, obviously. Well, yeah.
Going off of that, is it because the creature took away the creature's version of the sublime, so he doesn't want the creature to experience anything like that.
Oh. That's really interesting. He took away his ability. Wow, he really is. I do think you're right that he attributes almost all of his unhappiness to this creature and takes almost no responsibility. So it's really interesting that he would then want to talk about revenge, right? And that's the thing that everything that he projects onto the creature seems to me to be not clearly. Can you read treachery in somebody's expression? Treachery is not like a facial expression, is it? It would be sort of like reading, right? I don't know. You're going to say something? He doesn't want to give the creature any power. He wants to hold all the power himself.
That's what he asked him to do.
Power of creation, that's one of the things he worries about. Will they make babies? Etc. That's interesting. So it's a kind of power struggle between them. I don't have a good answer. I'm gonna. I do have a good answer. That's my answer too. Ultimately, he needs to learn restraint. If he could just chill out here for a second, because it seems like a good plan to me. Maybe, am I crazy that this seems like a good plan to make another creature? Yeah.
If he made them mate, and they could have babies, wouldn't that pose a potential threat to humanity then at that rate? They kept breeding and then they got out and just fired.
Well, the same language was being used about all different kinds of different ethnicities and races and whatever. The idea that they're going to propagate and we're going to be overrun. Watch out, Europe will be overrun with these immigrants and these people of different colors, ethnicity. Right? You see what I'm saying? That I'm not saying that right? Because I bet you look in the Ingolstadt papers, somebody else committed a murder that month that the creature did, and it wasn't a creature that did it, right? Somebody waged a war that year, and it wasn't a creature who did it, right? So it's not just creatures that can kill or hurt people. So I see your point. That's what he's thinking. He's caught up in this logic of. So if you're okay with it, I kind of want to cut to the end of Victor's own narrative before we do Clairval at the very end. And I might actually save the Clairval for Wednesday when we come back and kind of I talk about the last bits of things. Bless you. So it is volume 3, chapter 7. And it's right at the end that I want to talk about because he is so right before he continues the letter to his sister, he says, we're still in the voice of Victor, the narrated voice of Victor through Walton. When will my guiding spirit in conducting me to the demon allow me the rest I so much desire, or must I die and he yet live? If I do, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, that you will seek him and satisfy my vengeance in his death. Yet do I dare ask you to undertake my pilgrimage and endure the hardships that I have undergone? No, I am not so selfish. Yet when I am dead, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear he shall not live. Swear that he shall not triumph over my accumulated woes and live to make another such a wretch as I am. He is eloquent and persuasive, and once his words have even power over my heart, but trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call on the manes of William, Justine, Clairval, Elizabeth, my father, and of the wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel arays. So these are Victor's final quoted words. Yeah. So if we let me do a second and talk then about the way in which this concept of the sublime become concepts of the unconscious. Because once you open up the room for the sublime, this kind of like whatever, you also open up the room for something like an anti-sublime, a disgust, right? Something that is beyond reason. So somebody says, well, why do you hate her? I don't know, I just do. It's just something in me, I don't know what it is. Right? Once you open up this space for an unreasonable reaction of complete like awe and acceptance and desire, then you open up the space for this anti-sublime, a kind of disgust. Because it seems clear to me that the creature is completely, he's a flawed individual, and maybe you want to I don't know, maybe I'm not a big fan of killing, but maybe you want to do something to try to protect people. But in any case, whether or not that's true, it's clear to me that Victor has a disgust that kind of is over and beyond this. And so I mentioned this to you before, and this kind of touches on this idea of the sublime moving into the unconscious. I wanted to give you these early kind of inchoate. Do you know what inchoate means? That means just about ready to come into being, like a seed that's already begun to sprout, but it's beneath the surface, and you can't yet see the tendrils poking up out of the ground. That's inchoate. Okay, so early inchoate theories of the unconscious. Don't worry, this will all be up on Carmen. All right. So again, this you probably know this, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. So the unconscious, who Freud fully theorizes this in 1915 in an essay called The Unconscious, he says that within the unconscious are these both parts of things we've just merely forgotten, plus repressed material. That means stuff that we can't think. So those of you in my theory class will recognize this diagram from today when we were talking about the sign, right? Looks like this. And in semiotics, the sign would be the signified and the signifier. But in psychoanalytic theory, it's the conscious and the unconscious. And this thing here is called the repression barrier. And don't worry. I might ask you very basic questions about this, but this is not going to be about psychoanalytic theory, so don't worry. Besides, this is only the first. Freud rethinks this model later and then kind of puts the two together. But the point being that these two can't talk to one another. These two are completely unable of talking to each other. So this part can't talk to each other. So it does not mean that things don't come up. It just means that when they come up disguised in some other form. All right? And what he calls it, the return of the repressed. So if I were to call this Victor's sort of psyche, I would suggest to you that what comes up, whatever it is, his own guilt, his own feelings of unhappiness, his own internal whatever, gets projected onto the creature. Everything is the creature. Everything becomes about the creature. Societally, we do this all the time, right? You know, it's back when, before you guys were born, it was like the welfare cheats, these mothers that are sucking up all the money, you know, or it's there's somebody that's to blame, right? And it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, there's always somebody else to blame, right? It's those people, they're doing it, they're doing this thing, right? So that is, the repression barrier doesn't allow this thing to be thought, and so it comes up in a disguised form. All right. You've probably encountered all this before, right? So awareness of the return of the repressed in Romanticism. So here is Blake. Blake's understanding of this, I've told you before, is without contraries, there's no progression. So there's always a tension working against two things trying to be known. Trying to know the thing and trying not to know the thing at the same time. Right? So you have a big decision to make. Should I take this? Should I transfer there? Should I go to this school? Should I major in this? The Freudian argument would say there's a part of you that probably already knows what you should do, and then there's a part of you that doesn't want to know that thing that you should do. And they're in tension with each other all the time. And that's okay. That's part of how we work things out. This is Blake. It doesn't matter. This character is supposed to be divine reason. Its name is Urizen in Blake. That's what he calls it. But it's one aspect. But you don't get Urizen without the other character he calls Los, L-O-S, which is all animal, all feeling. Right? You know what I mean? Like, so you get reason and animality kind of mixed. Right? So you get this kind of idea of the unconscious. Also kind of that Victor stands for enlightenment reason, right? The kind of main theoretical driving force that we're in at this moment. If Victor represents this, then what happens is that what is unacceptable to Victor, the stuff that's here that's trying to come out, gets split off and then projected onto this other thing, which is the creature. Now, this is not a full reading of this novel. Please don't go and say, Professor Ruderman said that the Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is all about the return of the repressed and the rejection of part of himself. No, I don't even mean that. And in fact, I really don't mean Victor so much as I mean the whole kind of developing Enlightenment Western European thought. There's something we can't see in ourselves. We can't stand in ourselves. Whom? It's those others. You know, there's a term that used to get used all the time. Orientals. Those Oriental people, or those, you know, like it's this kind of. There's always somebody else. Here, I mean, here it was probably Native Americans, right, and Mexicans and slaves and blacks and whatever. It's always something else gets articulated as being that can't be tolerated. So that's just one reading, though. It's just one reading. It seems. Let me give you some numbers. All right. If we were to think about this in terms of class rejection, that what the creature in fact represents is somebody who's trying to outstep their class, then you might be able to, and this is a reading that if you've got the Norton, there are readings like this in the back, right? So there are psychoanalytic readings in the back. There are there's one that's a feminist reading in the back. Frankenstein. This is Spivak. Frankenstein is a critique on imperialism. That's in mine, right? So there's all these different ways to understand it. But if you understand it from a kind of class critique point of view, then what you have, these are my things that came up for me that I found either in volume 3 or elsewhere in the book, but primarily in volume 3. The creature feels similar to people in the working class. That's point number 1, right? Point number 2, Victor creates the creature as the sort of bourgeois class creates the working class, right? Actually, it's not the bourgeois class that creates the working class, it's the capitalist class that creates the working class. But let's say he represents a kind of bourgeois side of that, right? Victor feels that the creature is now a nuisance, a problem, right? But he needs him in a weird way, right? They are almost two sides of the same coin, right? Just like the worker needs the capitalist, and just like we know that in fact, who has the most power in this society? Is it the rich and powerful? What do you think? Yeah?
Yeah.
What if I said it isn't? What if I said it's the worker that has the most power? But we only have the most power if we agree that we have the most power. Right? A general strike, like what's happening in France right now, they'll agree to almost anything. Yes, we need to get things back on track. You just say, I'm not going to work. None of us are going to work. Like, let's say you're a school teacher, and I'm a nurse, and you're a bus driver, and you're an IT specialist. And we say, you know what? Until she gets, where things, we're going on strike along with her in a supportive strike. By the way, that's illegal in this country. Home and free. It's illegal to do that. You're not allowed to go on strike to support somebody else's strike, somebody else's union strike. If your union voted to do that, then it's illegal. Used to be, you could do that, right? So what you mostly get now are like these teachers that have gone on strike in West Virginia and in California, where there's mostly wildcat strikes. That means they don't participate with their union. They organize independent of their union because their union is all connected to, right, whatever. So we have the most power. And so it's a weird relationship between the creature, and the creator, because they both need one another in a way, right? And so it's a kind of like really interesting thing. In terms of the time period in which the novel is being written, average wages for unskilled workers, like the people that did it for thousands, or not thousands, but hundreds of years as hand loom weavers and farmers and ranchers had made their living, they saw their wages fall from about 44 shillings a week to 15 shillings a week. Right? That's from 1790 to 1850. Then in 1832, 4 shillings a week. Right? So this was on the minds of people. There were massive demonstrations, as we'll learn, in England for bread. There were riots for bread. But mostly there were riots to stop these things called the corn laws, which were very, very hurtful to small farmers, but really, really good for big industry, right? Also, people didn't have the vote. A very small percentage, like about 20% of people had the vote. So that was the other reason they were trying to the creature, this is another way in which the creature represents perhaps a kind of working class kind of perspective. The creature wants to improve his own conditions, but he has very limited means by which to do that. He cannot form solidarity with anybody else, because nobody wants to deal with him, right? It's very limited, right? And then finally, he shows the marks of an oppressed class, and he acts out of class anger. Again, this is not my reading even. These are my statistics from stuff I looked up about like what was happening at the time that Shelley was writing this. Shelley's father, William Godwin, was very much on the side of workers. Percy, her mother was really, really radical on the side of women, workers, etc. Percy, this Shelley, was really very radical. Byron, who they were hanging out with, was very radical. So she had these radical views. So it's possible to read them into a way that she sort of understands this. When they're, and we'll talk more about this on Wednesday, but when they're traveling together, when they're living in Italy, and then they're traveling through Switzerland, through Austria, through Germany, Percy says the way to understand how a society treats its poor and how it treats its workers or its peasants is to look at how open the children are. His idea was that the children, when you just meet children on the street and they're open and they're talking to you, then at least it's a less repressive culture, right? Even if they don't have great economic needs, it's less repressive because those children have this openness to them and they haven't been kind of tamped down. As he believed English children had. He believed that almost like, it was almost that it had risen to a point where the poor had been so stigmatized in England. And don't even get me started. I mean, if you got me started on chimney sweepers in London at this time, you would be aghast. You would not believe what they allowed to happen to these children, right? And they continued to do it. And they would pass smaller reforms, and then they take them back a little bit, and these like liberal little housewives, oh, I love these little children, but they're like, really, they clean the chimneys better than anything else. So they were like back to like shoving them up the chimneys to do this work. All right. Yes. So that's my sort of. Does anybody want to like comment on any of this before we say? So there are these other readings which we'll talk about a little bit on Wednesday. They're very available for this novel, right? There's certainly a feminist reading of this novel. Even though the only main character is very marginalized, like Elizabeth, the only main female character is, but that almost is in itself a feminist reading in the destruction of the female creature's body. Right? So that's another way of reading it. So there's the feminist reading. There's the. I've given you part of the psychoanalytic. I've given you a weird kind of hybrid psychoanalytic class reading. All right. So if you have not finished, please finish by Wednesday, and we will then next week start. Oh, look, we have a mini quiz on Thursday, okay? So there'll be a mini quiz. I'll put up all the, it will only be on Frankenstein, I believe. Yeah, it says that, January 29th. I'm reading my own, that's what it says.
29 is Wednesday.
What?
29 is Wednesday. You said Thursday.
Oh, I meant Wednesday. I've taught so long on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule. I'm sorry. Wednesday. I mean, I've taught for 11 years on a Tuesday, Thursday schedule, so I will continue to make that mistake. Thank you, everybody.